There was an article that recently came out that listed the top 5 states that people regret the least moving to. In addition to that, there was a comment recently on my YouTube channel that suggested that, hey, the traffic actually isn't too bad so long as you have the right expectations when you're in the area. And I think between those two things, if you are considering relocating to an area or moving to someplace new, I think setting the proper expectations will help relieve some of the potential regrets of making such a dramatic and huge shift and transaction in your life. That is what today's video is about. 16 harsh truths about Fort Collins, Colorado. And if you can absorb those, understand those, and be okay with them to a certain degree, I think your transition to Fort Collins in the northern Colorado area can be extremely successful. So if you have any questions at the end of this video, feel free to comment below or reach out to me and my team. We've helped hundreds of families move and relocate to the area. And if you're buying, selling, or investing in the area, give my team and I a call, text, or email, and we'd love to be an asset on your team. But without any further delay, let's jump into today's video, the 16 harsh truths about Fort Collins, Colorado. Let's go. All right, number 1, traffic patterns and driving routines for people in Fort Collins. I will say that Fort Collins is an extremely car-dependent community. Most trips are gonna average about 20 to 23 minutes for a one-way commute. On top of that, over 80% of the people that are driving to or going to downtown are using a vehicle. From there, the rapid growth of really the entire Front Range, but specifically Northern Colorado, Johnstown, Windsor, Berthoud, Loveland, the economic artery that is I-25 is gonna have, or currently already has, roughly 1 million people between here and Denver. So that being said, with that being really our sole way to get from here to Denver, traffic can be annoying. And with the 3 lanes gonna be finished by 2029, it might relieve some of that congestion. But I will say setting the right expectations between traffic patterns and driving habits of people in Fort Collins is something that can be a little bit frustrating because you're like, wait, you're a platinum rated bike community. Why are people not biking more? Or what about the public transportation? Well, the reality is we are a car dependent community with one major economic highway between here and Denver. So setting those expectations is important. Number 2, homelessness in downtown. Now, I think an important part to distinguish is between homelessness and transience. Homelessness is something that we absolutely have to address head on, help those people that are experiencing homelessness in that situation or time of life, and hopefully bridge the gap to get them into a better situation. Transients, on the other hand, are people who are making their way through the community, tend to be a little bit more destructive, isn't necessarily the right word, but combative or more of a nuisance to those in the downtown area. Homelessness, we are actually building a new homeless shelter, breaking ground actually this year, set to open in a couple of years, or potentially mid to late next year. That being said, it's gonna add 250 beds. It's gonna be a world-class facility, state-of-the-art security, lighting systems. There's gonna be some mental health there available to people, and it's going to be located on North College Avenue, and that's just breaking ground. But I will say that the movement of the homeless shelter from Riverside and Linden to North College Avenue will relieve some of that homelessness issue, especially kind of in the late evenings when people are really kind of getting in there, getting their food, getting prepped, ready for, a bed, to secure a bed. And with the expansion of Old Town North to the River District, that's gonna relieve some of that issues or kind of crossing of paths that might be a little bit uncomfortable. Just the other night, my family and I went to the Union, which is right across the street from the Mission, and we walked around for about an hour afterwards. Never felt any issues, but I will say, going downtown, that's kind of where the majority of folks might congregate. Not too big of a deal. We have institutions like Outreach Fort Collins, Fort Collins Police Department, and between those two, we've really been able to bridge the gap to make it a safe environment for both people that are visiting here, citizens of Fort Collins, and also the homelessness population themselves, to have an asset and a resource to help them kind of bridge the gap between some difficulties in life. Number 3, the weather whiplash in Fort Collins. I've talked about it before, but there was one day specifically that it just rings, to the forefront of my mind. And it's essentially, I was driving and we were gonna have a polar vortic freeze. And I was like, how is that even possible? It's 60 degrees right now. Well, it dropped like 40 or 50 degrees within a couple of hours. It was insane. I remember driving along Timberline on Horsetooth, and by the time I went up to Drake, over all the way to Shields and back to Harmony, it had shifted and the weather was already coming in strong. But then we have 250 to 300 days of sunshine a year. So the reality is yeah, you're gonna get snowstorms and then you're gonna get the sun in the afternoon to melt it off. But then you might get a thunderstorm after you've had just an 80-degree day in the summertime. So I will say Colorado weather acts like Colorado weather. It's a saying here, it's Colorado. Whenever there's a weather issue or a quick change of weather, it's Colorado. Number 4, moving here, you have seasonal property maintenance. We have 4 distinct seasons. With that comes the responsibility of keeping up your house, which does add expense, time, and sometimes some annoyance and frustration because you're like, oh my goodness, it's October 15th and I haven't blown out my sprinklers. I need to get on that right away. Some ideas of seasonal maintenance are going to be replacing furnace filters, checking and servicing your furnace, clearing out gutters from when the fall close and you don't want you want those gutters clear so it's draining properly and not just overflowing onto your foundation. Snow shoveling is going to be important. When we have those 250 to 300 days of sun, well, that's pretty intense on both the exterior paint, staining of the decks and fences. So you're going to have to do that on an annual basis. Sprinkler startups that might come with some sprinkler breaks and repairs because they froze and maybe the people who blew out your sprinklers didn't do as good of a job right there. That's really it. The bigger, one of the bigger weather events that we do experience here in Northern Colorado is hail during kind of that May, June time period specifically, but it can happen throughout the summer. And it is a potential where you're going to have to go through, submit an insurance claim, replace your roof, potentially some windows, new paint on the siding. Now, I've lived at my house for nearly 10 years and we have had one hailstorm in that time. So it doesn't happen all the time, but it is something that if it does happen, make sure you're prepared and then properly maintain your house from there. Number 5 are public transportation or lack thereof. Now, I will say the City of Fort Collins City Council is working on it. They're trying to revamp some of our city public transportation within the city, whether that means fewer lines and more rapid. We have a bus rapid transit system, the MAX system that is very consistent every 15 minutes or so. They've added service on weekends. There's a very small percentage of our population that's using public transportation. And I've experienced it myself. It's not very reliable in its current form. They're trying to revamp that. They're trying to add some additional MAX bus rapid transit systems, specifically on Elizabeth for CSU students, because they're the heaviest users of our public transportation, or some of our heaviest users, and then eventually along Harmony Road and then up north as well. But that being said, our public transportation is very lax. It's not great. We are a very car dependent community, as a reminder about number 1. Number 6, altitude adjustment. Between being closer to the sun, I'm bald, red hair, blue eyes, fair skin, I get burnt quick. And I will say, it's surprising. You can get burnt in any season of the year. It's not like it's just summer that you're gonna get burnt because, hey, during winter, if you're out there, shoveling your driveway, for instance, and you don't have a snow cap on and you're out there for 15, 25 minutes, you can get sunburned. On top of that, my in-laws, when they come here, we always try to remind my mother-in-law to, hey, drink your water. Make sure that you try to avoid those headaches when you get here because they're coming from sea level up to altitude about 5,000 feet. And it can be an adjustment for kind of your breathing, and you might feel a little bit thinner air. There's a reason why Olympic athletes come and train in Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, and CU has one of the best cross-country teams in the country. Year after year after year, it's because of that high altitude. It makes our lung capacity increase when we go down to that lower altitude areas. But high altitude is a thing that you're going to have to address when you're here. Now, Fort Collins, number 7 is growth in surrounding areas, and City of Fort Collins itself is actually having a slower growth. We are still projected to get up to 250,000 people by 2050. We're currently sitting around right around 180,000, and we've actually kind of been stagnant at that for a few years. But the reason is because areas like Timnath, Johnstown, Severance, Berthoud, you name it, Meade, there are areas along northern Colorado, that Front Range, I-25 corridor, that are really experiencing expansive growth, rapid growth. And so while Fort Collins is kind of steady growth, the area itself is getting bigger and more populated overall. So expect that as far as, again, traffic along I-25, potentially needing to put reservations in at restaurants on weekends. And additionally, when you're going shopping, there's going to be lines at checkouts. Christmas holiday seasons are going to be busy. So the Northern Colorado I-25 Front Range is growing and growing rapidly, but Fort Collins is kind of steady growth, but expect that to grow to 250,000 people by 2050. The majority of that is going to be on the northeast side of town. There are just developments after developments going in. Pro tip, if you're looking for future appreciation, if you're buying a house, looking at northeast Fort Collins, might be you're in the first or second inning of that growth there. So there's still many more innings to go. So if you're down for the long run, northeast Fort Collins is going to see some expansive growth here in the near future. Number 8, and I will say, thank goodness for online shopping, but we've got to make sure we're shopping local. So there's a balance here, but it's hard to shop local when there are limited retail options. In Fort Collins, for example, you can go downtown and there are some great small shops, boutique shops. From there, you have the Front Range Village in Fort Collins on the southeast side. Maybe the mall becomes something one day, but it has been a struggle bus for the last 20 years about. Centera was a godsend as far as retail therapy for people here in Northern Colorado, not just Fort Collins, but Greeley, Loveland, Windsor, that area in general. But overall, the retail options in Fort Collins are limited. So you might find yourself, if you're really wanting to go kind of get specialized shops or wedding dress shopping or anything along those lines, there are some options in Fort Collins, but Denver down south is probably going to be where you find the majority of those retail options. And the reason why we have limited retail options is because, we don't have the dense population that supports some of these unique like Apple stores in Fort Collins. They have specific demographics that they bring their stores in, and Fort Collins doesn't necessarily meet that, which then leads into our limited nightlife experiences in Fort Collins. Fort Collins is a sleepy town. Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. It starts to wake up Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but Sunday night as well is pretty sleepy. So expect stores, nights outs to be closing around 9, 10 o'clock. Now you will see the late night college, kind of bars and dive bars open until 1 or 2 a.m. But the reality is it's a limited nightlife options in Fort Collins. And again, my wife, if she was going out with friends, they were going to be going downtown Denver. That's one of the things if they're looking to have a really fun night out, going dancing, going to clubs, there's not a ton of options in Fort Collins. So make sure that that's a realization and expectation. Number 10, and this one just kind of came up, CSU plays by its own rules, which is a great thing in the sense of they bring over 8,000 jobs, 35,000 students, but they are ran by the state, so their kind of governing body overrides anything in Fort Collins, specifically billboards. They just agreed to and are building 12 billboards in Fort Collins, even though there's a billboard restriction in Fort Collins. Our sign ordinance does not allow any new billboards, but CSU kind of plays by its own rules. On top of that, they have the ability to kind of restrict what's being built or how it's going to be built on their own land. Now, that can be a little bit frustrating, but overall, CSU and Fort Collins plays very nice in the sandbox. But understand that there could be things like, I will say that if I were living across the street on Prospect Avenue in one of those houses, there's some nice, cute little neighborhoods, estate homes, and there's now going to be a billboard across the street. And you're like, I thought Fort Collins didn't allow that. Well, that's CSU property, and they're going to do what they want to do, even if Fort Collins says it's different. So knowing that in advance, if you're living in and around CSU, know that they can play by a little bit different rules than the rest of us here in Fort Collins. Number 11, and we're in the season right now, about to exit the season, thank goodness, because it's been relatively low-key, knock on wood, but our wildfire risk here in Northern Colorado. There has been some significant fires since 2001. The majority of our significant fires have been since that time. Cameron Peak, the Marshall Fire down in Boulder, High Park Fire, and some other smaller fires throughout. But I will say it is something that I think is at the forefront of everybody's mind. There's a lot of great communication that's now happening for people that are going up and camping up in Red Feather. We were just up there this past weekend, and the fire risk, it was very clear. Do not have open fires. open barbecues. It is a fire risk because it's dry, it hasn't rained a lot, so make sure that we're protecting ourselves. But it does take just one small spark for, it could be, natural. Most of them are going to be human caused fires. But I will say we had clients actually move from Fort Collins to Asheville, North Carolina because of their fear for some fire danger. And then there are some interesting statistics that I want to be specific about. So I'm going to read from my list. So this is according to Climate Check. A remarkable 77% of buildings in Fort Collins fall within significant wildfire risk zones. Data shows that 80,000 properties face at least minor wildfire risk, with 4,000 facing moderate risk, reflecting widespread exposure. And then there's actually some data out there, and I didn't put it on here, but it's essentially saying that 99% of the properties in Fort Collins have some sort of wildfire exposure over the next 30 years in Fort Collins. And I personally find that extremely hard to believe. Now, I might be naive. I might have my head in the sand. I don't necessarily believe that that could be true with our underground utilities, our increasing building codes, how serious I can tell you, when I ran Old Town Square Properties, the commercial buildings, we have fire inspections all the time. Sprinklers, making sure that they're pressurized, fire extinguishers, annual checks. The building code in Fort Collins and the inspections, I personally have a hard time believing that, but that's not to say that it's not impossible, and that's what the experts are saying. So it's something to know if you're moving to the area that there is some exposure. Number 12, water scarcity and raising rates. Personally, Fort Collins Loveland Water District, we saw about a 30% utility rate increase this year. On top of that, actually developers saw our water shares stay relatively flat in the city of Fort Collins, around $64,000. But one share serviced about 4 houses, and everything that we're seeing, those water prices and shares of water are only going to increase. There's a reason why the Glade Reservoir is being built, Chimney Hollow is being built, Halligan Reservoir is being expanded. The growth of northern Colorado is seeing such a demand that we need to supply water to those areas, and how we're doing that is by way of reservoirs, hopefully technology advance. But in the meantime, our utility rates and our developer costs for our plant impact fees and our shares of water are increasing. So knowing that in advance is definitely something to consider. Number 13, biking has its challenges with drivers. We're a platinum rated bike community with over 50 miles, roughly, give or take, of paved trails and over 250 miles of biking trails within Fort Collins, closer to 280. But that being said, a lot of those are protected. There is some tensions on the roads. Like when I rode with a group that ended up going on a Wednesday at noon, and we ended up taking County Road 5, and the entire group took the entire lane on this county road. And I will say, as a driver, I could see that being frustrating. As a bicyclist, they're doing it to protect themselves. Annually, there are deaths on cyclists all the time, every single year. In fact, there was an Olympian who just recently passed away as a cyclist who was riding in Boulder, got hit, ended up passing away, unfortunately. So there is this tension of a bike community with vehicles and cars. Fort Collins is doing a lot of work to try to build, we have like 70 more miles of paved trails slated to come over the next 40 years. Protected bike lanes, better, safer streets. We do have a vision, 0 serious injuries or fatalities in the near future between vehicles and cyclists. So it is important to the city of Fort Collins, but it is something to know. There is some tension there because there is such a drive for people to ride their bikes, and well, there's still roads with people driving on the roads with their vehicles. Number 14, Poudre River and its dark side. Well, with Poudre River comes flooding possibilities. Also, the Thompson River has had some dramatic floods in the 1970s. Feet of water coming down. Over 100 people died in that flood. And the Poudre has flooded, and that's kind of, if there was any flood zones in Fort Collins, just look at the Poudre and you can see the FEMA website where those flood zones are. But there's not really many in Fort Collins, but along the Poudre there are. Additionally, it is a dangerous wild river. People might look at it during May and say, hey, let's go tubing. It's fast, it's fun. People die on an annual basis because they're tubing too soon. So trying to disseminate some of this information saying, hey, wait till a little bit lower tide or lower flow, and that's like late June, early July is when you can start to tube down the river. So there are some destructive things that come along with such a beautiful asset and resource to us in northern Colorado, and that is the Poudre River. So there are some flooding concerns. So if you're looking at or wanting to buy in the area, know that that's something to take into consideration. And if you're tubing, just be safe. Number 15, outdoor lifestyle is what brings people to Fort Collins and northern Colorado. But with it comes a price tag. And there are so many things that you can do for so cheap, like national forests, state forests, hiking, snowshoeing. There are, fishing. You can get a really inexpensive fishing license, but there are some things that cost a lot of money. ATVs, snowmobiling, day trips for a ski now up to Vail and Breckenridge is over $200. To Steamboat's like $250 to $300. Snowy Range you can find for about $50. Eldora is closer to $100. If you're looking to go rafting down the Poudre, that could quickly add up $90 per person or $400 plus for a group. Mountain biking is a big deal here in Fort Collins. I actually went mountain biking in Breckenridge and it was a phenomenal bike, and I asked how much that bike would have been and they said about $10,000. But I would say between $3,000 to $5,000 to get a pretty decent, good mountain bike. So if that's something that you're interested in, you're gonna have to lay down some money at the on the front side. Now that being said, once you do it, you have all the trails, all the paths, Lori Park. You've got so many different areas in Fort Collins to do some amazing mountain biking. So you do have to make that initial investment, but from there, it's essentially free. Now you can do some a little bit more affordable things like camping, hiking, fishing, again, hunting. There are some costs, like I would say processing the meat, your firearms, they're not gonna be cheap, but from there, getting a tag is very inexpensive. Same thing with a fishing license is very affordable. Camping, you gotta buy some gear up front, maybe a couple $1,000 for a tent and a grill and some other things that you might need, flashlights, etc. And hiking, a decent pair of boots are gonna cost you $150 to $200. So understanding all of that, there are so many things to do in Fort Collins and northern Colorado, but it does come with a little bit of a price tag. On the low side of $20 to $30 for a park pass, all the way to the high side of $20,000 for a boat. If you want to buy a boat and get on Horsetooth Reservoir, I would recommend just going and finding a friend who's got a boat on Horsetooth. Number 16, and this recently was a comment on YouTube. They asked, what about snakes in Colorado? I can't do snakes. Well, that is a fact and reality of life. Yes, we have got snakes. We've got gardener snakes in my backyard. My kids have been catching. Bull snakes, a friend of mine moved to the northwest side of town from Chicago and is like, holy cow, these things are massive. And they have bull snakes on a relatively consistent basis. Now, bull snakes are actually a pretty decent snake. They can be aggressive, so you don't want to mess with them, but they do keep rattlesnakes away. And then from there, yes, you got rattlesnakes up in the mountains, up Horsetooth, up out of the prairie, grasslands. So you do have to be careful about that. Up in Livermore, Virginia Dale area, my uncle lived out there and they had rattlesnakes. So they had to wear high boots. He actually had a gun so that if you had to, you could take care of some of that. But dealing with wildlife in Fort Collins is a reality. Some of the wildlife that you might experience that I've never seen a bear. My wife, they were on a paddleboard and about 100 yards away, there was a mom bear with 3 of her cubs swimming in the water. She's experienced it. We've had friends from South Carolina, Indiana, who might have seen the exact same bear up the Poudre. From there, you've got wolves now in really Routt County, really on the west side, kind of Steamboat area. But that's a reality, so you got to be careful there if you're hiking in those areas, being aware. Mountain lions, there's mountain lions encounters, is close to Fort Collins and in Fort Collins. Black bears are, there. And then as small as raccoons, they're going to be out and about nightly digging in your trash, and they can be aggressive. Prairie dogs, they carry with them diseases. So make sure that your animals are on leashes if you're walking through areas with prairie dog farms. On top of that, they can be relatively invasive if you live on property and land, and they are difficult and protected if you want to try to get rid of them from your property. And the last couple are coyotes. Coyotes are definitely in and around Fort Collins, northern Colorado. So you got to be careful, again, if you got small dogs. On top of that, small dogs or small humans. We were living at my dad's house, and there was actually, he lives close to Warren Forest, and there was a tree with 2 bald eagles raising, I think there was 2 hatchlings or young birds. And at that time, my son, I think he was only like 6 months or 8 months. And we're like, we can't leave Boone out there because there are bald eagles and they will pick his ass up and take him away. But also small dogs, so coyotes and birds of prey are here. So wildlife in Colorado is gorgeous. It's crazy, you know, a story quickly, that same couple that moved here from Chicago, they go, I guess we're official Coloradoans. My wife saw a mountain lion today. And I said, well, you're more Coloradoan to me than me because I've never seen a mountain lion. That being said, I would love to see some of that wildlife at a distance, not too close, but it is a reality, especially if you're going up hiking by yourself. Know the dangers and kind of what to bring to kind of protect yourself. So is Fort Collins a place, after hearing those 16 harsh truths about the area, a place that you could see yourself relocating to and being okay with? I will say there's some things like, for me, like going to Arizona and having a scorpion in my house and having to treat for scorpions on an annual basis, or having 120-degree days and the AC going out. I'm probably not an Arizona guy year round, but knowing that in advance helps me make those decisions. If you have any specific questions about moving or relocating to the area, again, ask us. We've helped hundreds of families move to the area and would love to be a resource and answer some questions if you have those. But otherwise, I appreciate you watching and listening. Take care and have a great day.